Howdy. This is Severe Weather EU May weather forecast. Polar vortex collapse effectiveness now subsiding, but what will the new pattern look like? As we had for the last spring month. The collapse of the polar vortex has shaped the weather in the past weeks, but now the latest forecasts show that these effects are diminishing quickly. New weather patterns will develop in the month of May over North America and Europe, significant also for weather development into summer. The polar vortex is a very powerful short to medium range weather driver. For this reason, we monitor its activity high above in the stratosphere. The polar vortex underwent a strong collapse event in March with the effects lasting for a few weeks. We are now seeing a forecasted shift in the weather patterns, starting to set a tone also for the coming summer. Rise and fall of the polar vortex. Every year, as we head into autumn, the polar regions receive less and less sunlight. With less solar energy, cooling begins over the North Pole. Ah, how is it then with this human made climate change again? But anyway, but as the polar temperatures drop, the atmosphere further south towards the equator is still relatively warm as it continues to receive light and energy from the sun. You can see the winter solstice in the image below. The polar regions receive little to zero solar energy compared to regions further south, which still continue to receive plenty of sunlight and warmth. But that's really annoying. Yes. But as temperature drops over the polar regions, so does the pressure. With the colder temperatures over the pole, the temperature difference towards the south increases. This causes strong global pressure difference from the poles to the equator, and a large low-pressure cyclonic circulation starts to develop across the northern hemisphere. It extends from the surface layers far up into the stratosphere. This is known as the polar vortex. Yes, it continues until it reaches the sun, because we are connected to the sun through the polar vortex, the Birkeland currents on the north and south pole. Earth is a capacitor in space. We are just one dot in the loop of the magnetic, or how to put it, of the Birkeland currents, which connect us to the sun and to all the other planets. We produced a three-dimensional model of the polar vortex extending from the lower levels up into the stratosphere. The vertical axis is enhanced for visual purposes. You can see the image in the image below what the actual structure of the polar vortex looks like. Where is the picture? Check it out. Yeah, double layers and all these kind of things. Really interesting. The polar vortex behaves like a very large cyclone covering the whole North Pole down to middle latitudes. It is connected through all atmospheric levels from the ground up, having different shapes at different altitudes. Yes. In the next image below, we have the bottom end of the polar vortex at around 5 kilometers, 3 miles. The closer to the ground we go, the more deformed the polar vortex gets because it has to interact with the rough terrain over the continents. Or it might just be because we have telluric currents in the mantle and in Earth itself. Be aware of its cold arms extending into lower latitudes, bringing along colder air and snowfall. These arms also pack a lot of energy and can create strong winter storms, like a nor'easter in the United States, or powerful cyclones in the North Atlantic. We are typically focusing more on the stratospheric polar vortices as it plays a very important role in the weather development throughout the season. It is known for its strong influence down from the stratosphere. The strong polar vortex usually means strong polar circulation. This usually looks like the colder air into the polar regions, resulting in the milder seasonal conditions for most of the United States and Europe. In contrast, a weak polar vortex can create a disrupted jet stream pattern. It has a much harder time containing the cold air which can now escape out of the polar regions into the United States and Europe. Typically, a polar vortex circulation is disrupted due to a rise in temperature and pressure in the stratosphere. This is called a stratospheric warming event, which can disrupt or even collapse the polar vortex. To put everything into perspective, we produced a high-resolution video which shows the recent collapse event of the polar vortex. We can see the polar vortex first being split apart, yes, followed by a strong displacement and disintegration. Polar vortex collapse event. Click to play. Yeah, this doesn't work. It's actually loading. Yeah, right, this didn't work. This didn't work at all, so let's continue reading a bit. The main takeaway from the video is that the polar vortex is not just one single winter storm or a cold outbreak that moves from the Midwest into the northeastern United States. It is a large cyclonic area that is spinning over the entire northern hemisphere, from the ground up to the top of the stratosphere, reaching over 50 kilometers in altitude. And yes, much more. We typically use the 10 millibar level when analyzing the polar vortex in the stratosphere. The layer is considered to be the mid-stratosphere and is generally a good representation of the strength and status of the stratospheric polar vortex. Wait a second, where are we? We are down here. We are really low. Is there any conclusion? Yeah, this is going the wrong direction. It should go up. I guess this is what they are trying to say. But notice the pink line, which shows a rapid temperature rise in March. You can see three distinct warming waves, each stronger than the last, and the final strongest peak has produced a breakdown of the polar vortex. Up, up, oh, and then it goes down. Yes. Let's continue a bit. The collapse of the planetary structure. Let's just scroll down. Wow, that's amazing. The heavenly pillars made visible for everybody. The vertical pressure anomaly reveals a connection between the stratosphere and lower levels. It shows a stratospheric low pressure area separated in two separate cores in mid March. Yes, they are battling. Early this month, the polar vortex was defeated and the polar circulation reversed. The remains of the stratospheric polar vortex were pushed over the eastern North Hemisphere, with a high pressure system taking over the stratosphere. So let's just go to the end because they might tell us some conclusion. No spring or summer in Europe or something. The first graphic is probably the most important in this story. It shows the vertical pressure anomaly from the surface up into the atmosphere. The red arrows show the marked process influencing down to the surface levels. We can see by the arrows that the high pressure anomaly resulting from the collapse propagated down. It connects to the weather patterns most strongly in mid to late April, but the effect of the polar vortex collapse is now starting to subside. But can see a positive upward anomaly forecast at the beginning of May that coincides with a positive phase of the AO seen in the forecast below. AO stands for the Arctic Oscillation Index, explaining the pressure pattern and circulation over the North Pole. A positive phase means a stronger and more stable lower level polar circulation. This is a strong sign of the subsiding polar vortex collapse effect. We can see the shifts between the positive and negative sides from late March and over the collapse of April, fluctuating to the polar vortex collapse after effect. The weather pattern at the beginning of the month can be seen below and is showing low pressure anomalies over the polar regions. The low pressure returning to the pole is the reason for the AO index is rising into the positive phase. This amplifies the polar circulation. But we are in mid-spring, so this can have a different effect than in midwinter. We can also see a ridge over eastern Canada and the United States. Another low pressure area is over Alaska. Such a pattern at the beginning of the month will provide colder than normal air into northern parts of Central Europe. Warmer than normal weather will prevail over southern and southern United States while a cold front moves over the Midwest. Taking a closer look at this front over the United States, we can see the colder than normal temperatures spreading from the Midwest down towards the south, while warmer temperatures will prevail over much of the southeastern United States. The air will be cold enough to bring some snowfall into South Dakota and Nebraska. Also, the higher elevations in the Rockies will still tend to get fresh snowfall during this time of the year. That's a really long article. But I have been doing videos about exactly that. Like Balticane, we might experience some crazy weather soon. All over the place. Europe, America. And this is what I'm talking about. Polar Vortex, Bergen current. But anyway, there is some proof of I have been talking about these kind of things. But let's see. Maybe I have been right after all. There is some bigger shift going on. I'm searching for the video. Yeah, that's the video I was watching at. You can check it out. There's links below that. About Spring Equinox 2022. One to remember. And it seems we just had an equinox but no spring. And it seems continuing. But anyway, I leave it here. Thanks. Bye.